And for those that are joining, everyone is on mute. If you have a question, I would drop it in the chat. Jermaine, you got, like I said, everyone's on mute. So feel free to monitor the chat, one or both of you, if people have questions. I do have to leave the meeting after the first 30 minutes to join another call, and then I will come back. The recording will be posted to the event here, and then I've also got a recurring. I've got a link on the Pardot Geeks blog that has all of the current sessions so far. I'm kind of updating it as it goes. So I hope here, this was the fourth one that we've done. The last one was around personalizing the prospect experience with Zoe Fisher. So that happened last week. And then you guys are here doing account configuration, which is arguably probably the most complex part of the exam, because it covers a lot of stuff has to do with specific. It's going to cover likely a lot to do with the Salesforce integration, particulars around getting the Lightning link set up. So you guys are in good hands. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Brandon and Jermaine to introduce themselves and get this kicked off. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Ben, and thanks joining us today. It looks like we've got 13 attendees, so from all over the world. So welcome everyone. This is, like Ben was saying, a larger part of the exam. So we put two brains together for you all today, and we're excited to get started. Jermaine, shall we?
Yes, let's do it. Welcome everyone.
Welcome everyone. Okay, so as Ben was saying, the topic of today's consultant exam prep series is account configuration. So all of the settings that go into making sure that account engagement, formerly known as Pardot, is going to work for you or for the consultant exam for your clients. Before we get going, we want to say thank you for everyone taking time out of your busy Monday. Jermaine and I have put some time into creating this presentation for you. I know Ben's been putting a lot of time and energy in just getting this whole entire series launched. So again, thank you from us, from Ben, just for attending and being here to allow us the opportunity to teach you and talk about the stuff that we love. Oh, my name is Brandon Walton. Look how good I look, Ben. I'm a pretty photogenic guy. That is not my picture, if you can tell, but a little bit about me. Account engagement, or Pardot, is how I actually got into the Pardot ecosystem. It was a long time ago, back when Pardot was acquired by Salesforce. I found out semi-recently I was actually one of the first folks to be a Pardot certified consultant in like a first sweep of individuals, which is kind of interesting to learn. So a lot has changed. In full transparency, a lot has changed since I took the Pardot consultant exam. But what we're really going to be focusing on today is the new stuff. So folks who are getting ready to prepare for the exam are going to be prepared for what the changes are. A lot of how the exam has been structured and set up remain the same, but there's new features that we want to be familiar with. So a little bit of background about myself. I am a marketing, a Salesforce marketing champion. I've been doing Pardot implementations for, it's weird to say, but about 10 years now. So I've been in the space for quite some time. I've seen a lot of change. And what I am now, I'm a founder of a Salesforce consulting group. We're called Cypress Learning Solutions. Jermaine is on my team, and what we do on our day-to-day is help folks set up account engagement. We work with a lot of small businesses, firms, boutique teams, things like that, getting things set up and just making sure that they know how to use it. So it is our background. I've been in the space for quite some time. Have seen a lot of changes. It has been a long time since I've had to take the exam. What I understand is there's a lot of changes that weren't on there when I took it that are on there now. So I'm going to do the best to speak to the changes to the best of my ability. Just know that it's been a while since I've taken the exam, but nice to meet everyone. And Jermaine, you're looking good there too on the screen as well. Nice golden hoodie.
We're twins.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jermaine Brewer. I'm based out of San Antonio, Texas. I've been in the ecosystem a few years now. I started off, well, actually, I'm a veteran in the Air Force. I did about 8 years, got out. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I went to school for computer networking, got my degree in IT, and did IT for about 8 years or so. And then I kind of stumbled upon Salesforce, and I liked it. I loved the ecosystem. Everybody was friendly. It's just like none other that I had experienced. So, um, got my admin cert, and about 5 months later, got introduced to Pardot. Didn't know what Pardot was. Hadn't heard of Pardot. I was only really in Sales Cloud, a little bit of Service Cloud, and stumbled upon Pardot, and I actually enjoyed it. And I say about 3 months after being introduced, I went, sat for my certification and passed, got my specialist. And that was only after doing about one Pardot implementation. And it actually wasn't a full implementation. It was pretty much the account configuration piece, pretty much what we're going over today. And I didn't do any consulting or anything like that. I just pretty much set it up for the customer and kind of showed them where things were at. And I went sat for my exam, and I just got lucky, I guess, and passed. And then a month later, I said, well, let me go for the consulting also. So I got a lot of feedback from other Pardot consultants and Pardot specialists, and everyone was like, well, while it's fresh on your mind, go ahead and just do the consulting. It's some overlapping with the specialist exam. And I didn't have a lot of experience. So looking at the exam guide, it was saying, you should have about 12 months experience, right? And I was like, okay, well, I only got one implementation under my belt, or half of implementation. But I went on and took it anyway and passed it. So I'm glad I went on and did that. After that, I ended up meeting up with Brandon, and he gave me an opportunity. And ever since then, I've been loving it. Been in many different orgs and seen a lot of different customers use Pardot different ways, use Salesforce different ways. I implement on a day-to-day basis. That's what I do. So this accounting configuration, I can pretty much do in my sleep almost. But so that's where I'm at, and I'm just happy to be here and share my knowledge and some tips and resources as we go through this. So welcome everyone. Nice to meet you, and good luck when you get ready to take your exam.
Awesome. Thank you, Jermaine. And Jermaine is a very understated individual. He's very bright. That's why you're able to pass those exams. So very impressed. All right. So today, like we've said over and over again, this is Account Engagement or Pardot Certification Exam Guide. If you're looking for the help article and where to find that, Trailhead has a place where you can go to look at the high level information, what you want to go into stepping into this exam. And Jermaine, maybe while I'm presenting, what might be helpful is if you share these links to the chat window, just in case folks don't have them. I think that the other presentations are doing something like this. So by now you probably know where to find that Salesforce Pardot Consultant Exam Guide. And again, what we're going to be talking about specifically is the account configuration piece. So the account configuration piece is 20% of the exam. I believe it's one of the largest, if not one of the largest banks of questions that you're going to get on this exam. The exam is 60 questions. So if we do some math there, what does that work out to? 20% of 60, that's going to be right around 12 questions. I don't know, anyone have a calculator out there? So be prepared for about 12 questions that are going to go into the account configuration. And so some of these bullet points here are pulled directly from that website. What they want you to be able to do, what you want to be able to cover for this portion of the exam is you need to be able to articulate, most importantly, understand the implications and importance of technical setup. So we're talking about setting up domains, what that means for emailing, for landing pages. That's a big part of the technical setup, understanding what that tracking code is. When I took the exam, there was no first party tracking versus third party tracking, but you'll want to understand that. Is what I understand of the newer exam. So you really want to understand all of those pieces, those technical pieces lying underneath the software that make it work. Jermaine, anything that you would add about just technical setup or the major technical pieces of a setup, and we'll go deeper into these things as our presentation progresses. But Anything I'm missing on the technical setup? There's domains, there's tracking code, there's email sending, tracking domains.
Now we'll get in the weeds of it. Just know it, and
Cool.
I would also recommend, if you don't already, get a dev org. It's gonna help you. That's what helped me. Go through there, do some account configuration, go in there and see what you can and can't do, things like that. That's definitely gonna be beneficial, especially if you don't have any, real world experience, or you can't get any hands on in a production org. Get a dev org. And also with the exam guide there, I know y'all probably already looked at it, but it says, you have to have so many months of experience. But I'm living witness that that's not necessarily true. So don't be discouraged if you only have, 3 months, 4 months experience. Don't let that stop you from going to sit for the exam. If you feel comfortable, you've taken some practice exams and you're scoring, greater than 80%, go take a shot.
Yeah.
So that's
To that point, when I first got started, also, one, there weren't really many resources at
mhm.
all. It was a very brand new exam for me. I went and failed the first time, and then went back in 2 days later, like failed, studied, went in 2 days later, and I'll tell you, no one has in the professional world or in the hiring world or from a client perspective has never asked the question, well, did you pass on the first time? So take the exam, and if you fail, that's okay, because you learn where you're at. Other things with account configuration, you want to be able to communicate best practices for doing things like data migration. When we're doing an implementation, one of the steps that we would do is we want to import existing prospect data. So you're going to want to understand all of the pieces that go in to that prospect import. You'll want to understand for other parts of the exam the different ways that prospects can be added to your account. But you'll really also want to understand how the import process works, and what's available and what's not available. When you turn on the connector, is it going to automatically add all of your records from Salesforce? You'll want to know those things in the account configuration piece. You'll want to know what the required fields are. So like Jermaine was saying, on your specialist exam, that's one of the things that definitely stands out. You'll want to know what fields are required to have a prospect inside of Pardot. Given a usage governance plan, develop and recommend a strategy that addresses organization and authorization or access. So think security. One of the things that can be a little bit of a gotcha, if you're not using it every day, is understanding those Pardot default user roles and what those mean. I also understand in the newer exam, again, since I've taken it, there's been a lot of additional add-ons for how the user sync works. That's now moved into the Salesforce process. So you'll want to understand how user syncing works and how you provision access to the different Pardot features and tools. Looks like that second point was copied over, but again, data migration you want to understand. And yeah, looks like the other one was also copied. I don't know what happened there on the presentation, but you can also look at the notes on the account configuration piece, specifically on that on the Pardot trailhead page, to know just in general what's going to be covered in this portion.
And to piggyback on that, definitely understand user management. Still to this day, I go through it really thoroughly in my implementations, but I still have customers who will message me, try to add a user, and they're doing it in Pardot or account engagement. And you no longer do your user management there. It's all done in the back end of Salesforce. So definitely know that. Um, that's a big
Yeah.
difference.
And on new accounts, that is going to be turned on by default, right? It's something that they're not turning on at all. Is that correct? That
What do you
user
mean by
management piece.
you?
So in the older accounts, there was a time where you click a button to move all user management into Salesforce. But in new accounts, is that enabled by default?
I haven't seen it enabled by default. The last
Okay.
implementation I've done, you still have to enable it. But
Okay.
regardless if you enable it or not, you still have to have a Salesforce account that's syncing with a Pardot user account, and you still do your user management in the back end of Salesforce. You can't create a Pardot user in Pardot anymore.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Good things to know. So a little bit about what the expectations are for this exam. So again, this is the consultant exam. So how this relates to being a consultant. In consulting, this would cover configuration or implementation. So being able to understand account configuration is going to help you when a client comes to you with a problem, or if you are being involved in the implementation of the platform. As a consultant, you're going to be brought in to make sure that Pardot or account engagement is configured correctly. There might be different needs that a customer has. Your expectation is going to be able to explain the steps that you're going through, and be able to make recommendations based off of requirements from a customer, and also recommend best practices, particularly around configuring their account. Like Jermaine was saying, this exam is difficult just to study without any experience. So one of the things that's always been tricky about Pardot is, unlike your admin exam where you can go into Trailhead and there's a lot of great trails to help you out, with Pardot, it's that special little add-on. And for a very long time, before you could even get a developer org, it was a tough thing to be prepared for, because you'd get a lot of folks who are already certified admins who just, I'm going to just take this exam. That's very difficult. It's recommended that you do have 12 months of hands-on implementation experience, or if you work for an implementation partner and you're seeing a ton of these, I think that helps a lot too, just because you're doing it all the time. It's critical for a consultant to understand the needs of your clients and to configure the account correctly based off of their needs. So yeah, the idea there is, it's our job to understand what goes into setting up the system, what the different settings mean, so that when we're working with different clients, we can communicate what those different settings do effectively. Anything else you'd add to this, Jermaine?
Nope.
All right, we'll move ahead. So here are some things that you might see on the exam, or questions you might want to prepare for. And what we'll do, Jermaine, is just talk through these 4 kind of ideation of questions. So the first thing, something that you might see is, given a specific scenario, explain the best practices for importing a list of prospects from a trade show. Jermaine, how would you attack something like this, or a client that needs help with something like this?
Yep. So one, I would help them with their Excel sheet. That's the first place I would go. See how their data is organized. That's usually that's a roadblock, if anything, because they don't really understand what they need, right? They might have some data there that they don't need. So you really want to make sure that they're only really bringing in that important data that they're going to be using for like segmentation and things like that. But definitely looking at the data first, making sure that they have the right fields in Pardot to map the data. So every column that they have on their Excel sheet, you need to make sure there's a corresponding field in Pardot to map it to, so they can bring in that data. And also make sure they have clean data, like for email addresses. Make sure everyone has an email, because we all know without an email address, they're gonna fail. You gotta have an email to get into Pardot. So that's usually some of the things I look at, and just making sure that they have the data in the correct format, making sure it's clean, basically. So that's where I would start.
Yep. And then the important thing there, might be an exam question, is what kind of formats the data for the imports can be. It cannot be an XLS. It has to be a CSV. So that's going to be something that you'll want to know. So CSV is comma separated value spreadsheet. Basically, it means it's not going to import in things like formulas, or VLOOKUPs will give it an issue, things like that. So it needs to just be a CSV file with the actual values sitting in there. One of the things that you want to know is, when you're importing that list, you want to be able to understand that Pardot is going to, well, again, since I took the exam, you have the option to do a match based off of the email. So if I was going to be importing from a trade show, I would probably use that setting. So match based off of email versus match based off of CRM ID. I'll pop in and show you what that looks like. So if we go to the prospects tab here, and again, this is one of my dev orgs, so there's not going to be a bunch going on here. You have an option now to create and update prospects using a Salesforce lead or contact ID. This is a newer feature. You'll want to know about it. I say newer, talking to old guy here. Or you also have the ability to create or update using email addresses. So for me, if I'm working with a client and we're importing from a trade show, that's important to understand that importing from a trade show, you're not really going to get a Salesforce lead or a contact ID. So it wouldn't make sense to match off of that value. But if we're pulling from a trade show, we will want to match off of an email address. And what's important to understand is if you're importing that list of folks who you met at that trade show, and some of those names are already in Pardot, Pardot is going to find that match off of an email address. And rather than creating that record again and creating a duplicate, it's going to just apply any other attributes that you're adding. So if you're adding them to a campaign or adding them to any other specific action, it's going to recognize based off of that email address. Now, another thing, just to tie into that conversation around prospect import, if you're working with a client that's been using Salesforce for some time and they're just adding account engagement to their SKU or their technical stack, there's nothing that's going to automatically say, okay, take every lead and contact inside of their CRM and go back in time and add those into Pardot. So that's where this top option can really be helpful. If you're working with the client and what the client says, we'll ask the question. We'll say, do you want all of your leads and contacts to be added to your Pardot account or account engagement account? If they say yes, or if they say we want some subset of that, what you end up doing actually, or what I would do is I would build that report inside of Salesforce, export that report as a CSV, and make sure that I'm including the Salesforce IDs for the leads or the contacts. And then I would choose the top option and then map them based off of the CRM ID versus the email address.
Yeah, and one thing
Anything
to
you would
take
add to
note on
that,
that,
Jermaine?
yeah, that second piece. So I remember from my exam, and this is real important to know. I mean, just for real life too. So right where your cursor is at, that note that's under create or update prospects using email address, you definitely need to know this. So if you do have multiple contacts with the same email address, it's gonna match with the one with the most recent activity. So definitely know that. That's important because now all part.orgs come with you can have multiple prospects with the same email. And it used to didn't be like that back in the day. So
Yeah, that's a great point. Specifically, if you're matching based off of the Salesforce lead and contact ID, if we're doing this matchup, there is a possibility that you could have Brandon at Cypress Learning in there twice. And so if you do have two different prospects in there with the same email address, um, it's the record with the most recent activity is the one that ends up being used, right? Is the idea, Jermaine? That's the main sticking point there when you're using, is it AMPSIA that they call it?
yeah,
Um,
AMPSIA, yeah. So it's gonna
allow
sync up
multiple
with that one.
prospect email.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's good
good
not to
good to
have a
know.
duplicate. So that's another thing you want to make sure on that Excel sheet that they are deduping. You know, they don't have duplicates and things like that. But
Yeah, and then Ben left a comment in the chat. Great point. Something else with the import, you can also assign a prospect to a Pardot user. However, contrary to the available documentation, do not use the Pardot user's email address. Use their
yeah,
Salesforce username. Yeah, and that just goes
username.
into the new sync. Way back in the day, you'd have this idea of a Pardot user and a Salesforce user, and you can have users that only log into Pardot only. They got rid of that, so now it's all based off of Salesforce username.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's a good thing to understand and know as you're addressing this exam, because they're going to throw these kinds of questions at you. We can't tell you what the exact questions are going to be. We can just really help with that frame of mind and what the gotchas might be.
Yeah.
Um,
And to Ben's
two,
point, that also he said he learned the hard
learned
way.
it the hard way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And to that point, yeah, if you don't assign them to a user, what I always tell customers is they're just going to be in Pardot. So they don't automatically sync over to Salesforce. And that's a lot of misconception that people have. They think when they just go add them into Pardot, they're going to automatically sync over to Salesforce. And if they don't exist in Salesforce, that's not the case until you assign them. And so you can do that upon import as being mentioned. And when you do that, then it will sync over to Salesforce as a lead if you don't have on the reverse syncing as a contact. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't remember there being questions about reverse sync on the exam, but that is important to know. What Pardot refers to as an MQL or marketing qualified lead is when you're basically saying in Pardot, this lead is ready to be added to Salesforce as a lead. That step comes from assigning that prospect either directly to a user or using the active Salesforce assignment rules. Explain the importance of domain authentication for email deliverability. Jermaine, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so that's probably one of the most important things with an implementation is getting the domain authentication. It helps your email deliverability. So what that means is you're less likely to get flagged for things like spam and spoofing and stuff like that. Because when you send out emails and Part out is sending on behalf of your domain. So having that authentication in place just helps your email um, deliverability. So you're more likely to get delivered in the inbox instead of the junk or spam or get blocked or blacklisted, things like that.
Yeah. So in this, this is a training at Oregon, and I've learned at Trailhead DX they don't even want me to have this anymore. We can't send emails from here, but you've got the email sending up top, and so you've got the SPF record, the domain keys. What happens is if you don't have this stuff set up correctly, here I have the domain that we can pop in here just to see the errors. You pop a domain in here. You've got validation status, not verified, not verified. What ends up happening is Pardot, you have to remember, is its own email server. So you've got you might be sending emails through Gmail or Office 365. Pardot is its own email server. So we need to authenticate that email server. So when those emails are coming from Pardot on behalf of Reply Intelligence or whatever it might be, whatever domain that you're sending from, we need to authenticate that. Otherwise, it comes with a warning. And we might have seen these before in the past, a big yellow banner if you're in Gmail that says, we couldn't verify that the sender of Cypress Learning is actually an authenticated user. So it comes with a big warning, and oftentimes it just goes straight to spam. So making sure that you've validated your domains by using a sender policy framework, a domain key, and the sender policy framework thing has changed a little bit too. Isn't that right, Jermaine? It's just another
Yes.
text record.
You don't even need it. It says that in the knowledge article too. You don't need to add a SPF anymore. It's not required. And then
Yeah,
also
they have a
the
validation key
validation.
is what they call it now. Yeah,
Yep, that validation
validation key
key.
and domain key.
Yep, that's what you add now. So that's
Cool.
very important to know also.
And so what it is it's text records that you'll add to what's called the DNS of the domain. You'll want to understand how that works. So if you haven't set that up, go through a dry run and make sure that you understand how to set up the domain, the emailing domain. Then also down below, there's a CNAME record that you'll set up to apply to a tracker domain. Tracker domains do a couple of things. They're going to allow you to host your Pardot pages at, like in this case, go.brandon.marketing. That's funny. I set this up before the whole "Let's Go Brandon" thing, but that's funny. And it also works with your unsubscribe pages and your tracking code. So you'll want to know what goes into setting those up and why. Which leads us to question 3: what are the differences between a tracker domain and the tracking code, Jermaine?
Yeah, so the tracker domain, as Brandon just mentioned, that's for your Pardot hosted assets. That's how Pardot can track your landing pages, your forms, who's submitting those things. So it's strictly for your Pardot hosted assets. It has nothing to do with your website, and a lot of people get confused on that part. With the tracking code, however, that goes on your website. So the tracking code is what you use to track visitors on your website. So you can see things like what pages they were viewing, how long they were on those pages. Pardot can get their IP address or their host name. Sometimes you can see the source where they came from, like if they found you from a Google search or something like that, or a paid ad. So that's the tracking code. Tracking code goes on your website. The tracker domain is for your Pardot hosted assets, and it has nothing to do with your website. It's strictly for Pardot to be able to track your assets within Pardot.
Yep. And one of the things, again, it wasn't around when I took the exam, but it might be something that you'll want to be familiar with, is what the first party tracking code is versus the third party tracking. So way back in the day, you only had one tracking code. It would be for Pardot. But now they add this PI host name. So the idea is the code is going to look like it's the same domain as your website. You'll want to understand a little bit about what that first party tracking is. We won't go into too much detail for now. What you'll definitely want to know about is the difference between a tracker domain and the tracking code, and what that tracking code allows you to do. So the tracking code is this little piece of JavaScript that you would apply to your website or your Google Tag Manager, something like that, to give you the capability to be able to track your visitor views. And like what Pardot's able to do, like Jermaine was saying, is based off of the IP that they're coming in. You could actually see your prospects and see what pages they're viewing. So you might be see something on the exam like the client wants to be able to understand what their prospects pages are viewing. What would be the feature that they would utilize? And that would be the tracking code. And then explain the difference between syncing prospects and accounts between account engagement and Salesforce. So what is different between a prospect syncing, or how prospects sync with leads and contacts, versus how accounts sync between the records. And the big thing there is prospects are bidirectional. So here's what's very helpful to visualize this here is if we go to your object and field configuration, in Pardot, they've got a notion of accounts, so you can have account fields. What you'll want to know is that's read only. So if there's something on the exam that says a client wants to update an account record from Pardot, you'll want to know that that's not possible. It is read only. It also syncs with opportunities, again, read only, based off of a contact role. If you don't understand that relationship, that's an important relationship to understand. And then you will want to know how prospect syncing works. So prospect syncing is bidirectional. And when you're configuring these fields, you have the ability to control the sync behavior, whether it's going to be using account engagements value, Salesforce's value, or the most recent value. You'll want to know that you're syncing up with the Salesforce field name. You've got the ability to use predefined values. So the values that exist, in this case, a drop-down value from Salesforce is being synced with a Pardot prospect record. This could be bidirectional. So if an update was to happen on the Pardot side, it could actually update Salesforce. So you'll want to know the differences between the different objects and how they talk to each other. To distill that down in the most simple form, prospects are bidirectional. That means Pardot or account engagement can update your Salesforce lead or contact object, but otherwise all Pardot can do is just read that information. Anything else that you would add to that, Jermaine?
Yeah, so the main takeaway is leads and contacts a bidirectional sync, accounts and opportunities are a one-way sync. So you can't make any updates to accounts and opportunities in Pardot like you can leads and contacts. But that's all I
Out
really
of the
have to
box,
add.
yeah.
Yeah, out of the box.
Out of the box. There's
Out of the
some
box.
there's some tricks that you can do, but they're not gonna introduce those on the exam. They're not gonna ask you about how to do something with a flow or a custom app
Custom
extension or
stuff.
anything like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, in the back of your mind, it's possible, but for the exam, that's what you're going to want to know, the out of the box stuff. All right, Jermaine, you want to talk a little bit about common problems that you hear?
Yeah, these are just a few, but so the first one here, my marketing users don't have access to Pardot. So let's go back to user management. So that's something you can do in a dev org. So again, get in that dev org. If you don't have access to production, go in the dev org, set up a user, know what permission sets they need. That's a big one. If they don't have access to Pardot, more than likely it's the permission set. Because if they have a Salesforce account, you can have access to Pardot. So that's one thing to note also. You have to have a Salesforce account to sync with a Pardot user account. So that's one of the things I would check first is permission sets and understand which permission set a user needs to access Pardot. How do I oh, you want to show something here, Brandon, or do you want me
Oh,
to
I
tell
was
you to
just
show
showing
something?
where the permission sets are
Oh
inside
yeah.
of Salesforce. So it's a little tricky because yeah, it's done on the Salesforce side now.
Yep. All
Um,
user management done in the back end of Salesforce. Remember that.
oh, and then actually you actually go here, right? You go to
Yep.
marketing setup. So there's a
You
permission
can go to
sets.
regular setup too. Yeah, you can do marketing setup or you can go to regular setup.
Business unit setup, manage users, and then you're adding your users here. And then again, underneath, behind the scenes, it's adding those users to Pardot. But as an admin, you don't have to manage it the way that you
But
used
but
to.
just one thing also to note too, just adding a user here, that doesn't give them access to the Pardot Lightning app. It only gives them a user account. If you want them to get access to Pardot or account engagement. So, and I do apologize. I'm gonna probably say Pardot. I'll try to say
Yeah.
account engagement when I can, but I'm just so used to Pardot. So I do
Old habits die
apologize.
hard. Yeah.
But yeah, so if you do want them to actually get access to go into Pardot to do things like create an email template or a landing page or a form, they're gonna need a permission set, and it's usually Sales Cloud user, Service Cloud, or CRM user. Those are the three permission sets that you would assign them.
Yep. And this is actually a helpful document, the Salesforce user sync for implementation. That'd be something that you'd want to be familiar with for the exam. A question came in the case of person accounts. So with person accounts, that's something you can set up by, is it still
Oof.
submitting a ticket, Jermaine, to support that, or?
Good luck. Nah, just joking. Person accounts can be a little tricky. You definitely want to make sure you read up on the documentation and learn the gotchas and the ins and outs, because the syncing is it it's a little different, and it can be a little tricky. But to
Yeah,
answer your question, can we update fields? Yes, you can update fields for person accounts. Again, just take a look at the documentation. I don't want to go too in depth because that can be a whole conversation in itself. But yes, you
yeah,
can update fields for your contact records. And also, let's see if we have it related for the person. If we have related contacts, I see
yeah,
person.
and I believe it's still based off
Yes.
of the contact record that's associated with the person account.
And you can
But it's
turn it
just the
on
way that the
yourself
data
now,
feeds in.
actually, too, bro.
Okay, yeah, you can turn it on yourself now.
All right. How do I control which of my Salesforce users have access to Pardot? Now, that's a good question. So I was mentioning uh, all your user management is done in the back end of Salesforce. Well, one piece of it is not, and that's this question right here. So determine your Salesforce profile will determine the role you inherit in Pardot. So Pardot has 4 different roles, and this is key to know. Administrator, which can do everything. Marketing is the next, which can almost do everything an admin can, besides some admin stuff. Then you have sales manager is the next, and then you have sales. So sales is the least privileged. And if you click on those links, it actually take you in there, and you can see what sales can or can't do from a marketing standpoint or from an admin or a prospect standpoint. If you notice here, there's nothing really checked for sales. So basically, this is where you kind of decide which role you want to give someone. Now, to actually assign them to that role, let's go into our connector settings, Brandon. So this is the one piece of user management that is not done in the back end of Salesforce. And then we're going to go to the user sync tab. And here's where you control which role someone inherits. So your
Okay, so
Salesforce
see, I'm bad.
profile,
I haven't clicked the button in this dev board.
yeah. But regardless, again, if you click that or not, Pardot has made it to where you still have to have a user syncing with a Salesforce user in order to, utilize Pardot. But yeah, so this is where you do your mappings for your Pardot roles, and this is
So
what
we've got the
determines that.
Salesforce profile here, and then the role, the level of Pardot access that we're going to give them here. So marketing user is going to be an admin, identity user is going to be an admin, system administrator is going to be an admin. All these other ones are just going to be marketing, marketing, marketing. We could do something like set a standard user to, oops, to sales. I don't know what's going on with that clicking there, but yeah, it's going to be important to know what access a sales user has, which basically they can see their prospects only, send
Hmm.
one-to-one emails. Sales manager can see all prospects, send one-to-one emails. Marketing users can build email templates, see all the prospects, see all the reports, all of that good stuff. They just can't do any administrative stuff. And the settings is the biggest piece there. And then admin obviously has access to everything. I don't believe they go into on the exam the custom roles for the higher level accounts. You do have the ability to create custom roles, or you can create your own custom versions of these. You don't have to worry about that for the exam.
Yep. Uh, One of our lead records was updated. Can you tell us why? So this would be a good use case for the audits tab. So this one is often overlooked in Pardot. So every prospect record, you have an audits tab. So here's where you can find what changes have been made and where did they occur. Was it in Salesforce? If it is, it'll say CRM. Or was it on the website? Maybe you had a form on your website someone filled out. You want to know where this job title came from, where this email came from, what a company name come from. Right here in the audits tab, you're going to get all that information.
Awesome.
So no to audits. We can't see any website visits and engagement history in Pardot. So that's a good one. So that's going back to the tracking code we were talking about. So you want to make sure you have the tracking code on every page you want to track on your website. So that's key. Because if you just put it on your home page, it might not track all the pages. So it's usually best practice you use Google Tag Manager if you're using it. That way it can spread it across all pages so you don't have to put the code within all pages. But yeah, if you can't see any website visits, it's probably because the tracking code is not placed in the proper place or haven't been added at all. How do records sync between Salesforce and account engagement? Well, that's with your connector setting. So we kind of touched on this. So with leads and contacts, it's a bi-directional sync. So anytime you make a change on the Salesforce side, within 2 to 4 minutes, was in the documentation. I still believe it's the same 2 to 4 minutes. It'll sync
That's
over
going to
and
be a
update
question
in the
that they
Pardot.
ask on the.
Yeah, that's something you want to know. You want to understand the syncing, how long it takes to sync. But Pardot in Salesforce is syncing in the back end when you make a change, so it's automatically updating, and and your connector controls that. We think our campaigns are set up incorrectly. Our reports don't make sense. So you definitely want to make sure you understand campaign management. Now, connected campaigns is automatically enabled in new orgs now. So not sure if you're going to see too many questions around connected campaigns, but just know that you want to make sure you have connected campaigns enabled in order for Pardot and Salesforce to sync with campaign management. So you're going to be creating campaigns in Salesforce, and in order for Pardot to have insights to that campaign and to have your campaign reporting accurate, you need to have connected campaigns enabled. So that's a big key takeaway there. And then the next bullet point, our emails keep going to spam with the warning. So that goes back to your email authentication, the domain authentication. That's the first place I would go look, is your make sure your SPF record is verified and your domain key are verified.
All right, here is a practice exam question that we'll do together with the group here. Just go ahead and type in chat what you think your best guess of the answer is. Linuxsoft wants to give users from their sales and marketing teams the power to explore and visualize important data by using the engagement history embedded dashboard. Which two steps should be completed so their users can engagement data on the Salesforce campaign and account records? We've got 1, 2, or A and B. Choose the best two answers. 1, create a custom Salesforce dashboard with both standard and custom Salesforce reports for each teams. 2, have each team member log in and reference the dashboard in the Analytics Studio app. A, assign the Analytics View Only embedded app permission set to each user who wants to see the dashboard. B, place the embedded engagement history dashboard on the desired object page layout using the Lightning App Builder. So we'll go ahead and give you about 30 seconds to get that answer. And Jermaine, anything that you'd want to add to that?
Uh, in the chat here, Edward said, go back to your PPT slide.
Maybe there's just a delay. I do have the PowerPoint up right now. Are you able to see the PowerPoint, Jermaine? Or I'm
Yes,
wondering if
I
the
can
web
see it.
applications. Okay, yeah, it should be on
And
the
then
PowerPoint. There might be a delay now.
he said no. Hmm.
Yeah, it might be just a browser delay. We'll just keep going, and then it should be on the reporting, if anything, just to make sure that we're
Yes,
mindful of
couple.
time.
And Kathy says she don't see the connector and setup. Is that due to my permission? I have admin role in Sales Cloud. So just because you have an admin role in Sales Cloud doesn't necessarily mean you have admin rights in Pardot. So that goes back to that mapping we just showed you. So if your
Yep.
Salesforce administrator profile is mapped to an admin role in Pardot, you should. But the connector is not in setup. Your connector is under the account engagement settings tab, formerly known as the Pardot settings tab. Yep, right where Brandon
Yep.
is. On the left, you have the connector. That's where you're going to access that. So that's why I meant there's one little piece of user management that is not done in setup in the back end of Salesforce. And that's where you do your mappings here.
Yep. And so it's if you don't have access to the connectors at all, you either don't have access to this page, or what I also see is if you try to click in here, it'll say you don't have access because your user doesn't have access to it. So Jermaine, what are the two correct answers for this question?
A and B. So you want to
Yep.
make sure. So with
A.
that engagement history dashboard, you need a certain permission set to be able to see it. And that's the analytics view only permission set. And also you want to make sure you add the dashboard to the layout in the Lightning App Builder. Normally I add it as a tab, but yes. So that's the two things you need. You need the permission set, and then you need to add it to the page layout.
Awesome. All right, now let's talk a little bit about technical setup, which is one of the other one of the other pieces. So a couple of questions that you want to know around technical setup. What's a CNAME and what's it for? CNAMEs are for that tracker domain. So CNAME is a type of entry that you're going to add to your DNS or your domain name server settings that basically point, go.brandon.marketing or info.cypresslearning or go.salesforce.com. it's going to point it to go.pardot.com. And what that means is that when you have that CNAME for your domain pointed to Pardot, you're allowing Pardot to host landing pages at that space. So that's what a CNAME is. You want to be able to understand that when we talk about our tracker domain setup. What are SPF and DKIM records? Why are they important? So those are for your email validation. You'll want to make sure that those are validated before you're sending emails out from Pardot. Those are the pieces that are required for those emails to go out. And actually, to Jermaine's point, the SPF record doesn't matter as much anymore. What's more important now when we go to domain management is this thing called validation status. So if we go back to here again, you notice that there's a new expected entry, another text record that you're going to add. So now when you're validating domains, it's just 2 text records that we're adding. You want to be familiar with that and why those are important. What is a tracker code and what's the difference between first party tracking and third party tracking? We'll just kind of hammer through these. I'm taking a look at the time. We don't have a lot of time left. So you want to know the tracker domain is that JavaScript, your website, web pages, to be able to track your prospect history. You want to know how Pardot behavior works there. And you'll want to know the difference between third party and first party and third party. First party basically means that you're adding your domain. So if my website is brandon.marketing, we're using go.brandon.marketing rather than go.pardot.com. Go.pardot.com being hosted on Brandon's website is technically a third party because those domains don't match. And what happens is browsers are going to start blocking those. So you want to know the difference of that. The correct way to implement tracking website engagement with Pardot, that goes into that exact same question. Understanding how that tracking code works and where you install it on your website and the first party and the third party differences is important to know. Best practice domains and emailing domains. Anything that you would add to that, Jermaine? And we're just going to kind of boogie here through these last little bit of slides. And you can review the recording, and these should be good bullet points just to give you some context to study for or to be prepared for. Salesforce configuration. You want to talk through these pretty briefly here, Jermaine?
Yeah, sure. How can Pardot be configured to work with person accounts? So again, go back to the knowledge
Okay.
article and definitely read through that. But you used to have to get Pardot support involved, and I believe it's no longer the case. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure, but I think you can go ahead and enable it yourself. How are Salesforce campaigns associated with Pardot? So just as I mentioned, the connected campaigns, you want to make sure that's enabled. So Pardot utilizes Salesforce campaigns and they're associated through connected campaigns. How are inactive campaigns in Salesforce tracked in Pardot? Well, with the inactive campaigns, this is kind of like a tricky question because most of the time when you're running campaigns in Salesforce, you want to make sure that they're active. So all your campaigns need to be active. Once they're no longer active, that means you're done with them. So they're kind of irrelevant at that point. There's really no tracking you're probably going to be worried about, but you definitely want to make sure the campaigns are active. And there is a checkbox that you have to make it active when you create that campaign. So that's important to know. Also, you want to make sure your campaigns is active and they will sync over to Salesforce. I'm sorry, into Pardot
Account
as long
engagement.
as you have account engagement, as long as you have connected campaigns enabled. So that's the biggest takeaway, connected campaigns enabled. Sales manager converts a lead to a contact, but none of the Pardot information transferred over. How would you troubleshoot this issue? So, one, I would go check your connector setting to make sure that you have the sync turned on. Oh, no, sorry, I read that wrong. Converts a lead to a contact. Oh, you would go check your lead conversion. So in the back end, when you first configure Pardot, there are some fields that come with the managed package that you're going to install. So Brandon, you want to go ahead and pull up the lead object and show that? So
Yep, that's where I'm at right now.
there's a lot of account engagement fields that gets installed when you implement Pardot, and you want to make sure that you go map these fields for lead conversion. So you do a one-to-one mapping to the account, to the contact. And then once you convert that lead to a contact, now that information will transfer over and you don't lose that information. So that's important to know also. Mapping your
Yep.
your fields.
Mapping your lead fields. Yes.
And the last one here, oh, troubleshooting sync errors. Haha, that's good to know too. So there is a document out there that lists some common sync errors. So you definitely want to make sure you go here. And this is one of those things that are very often overlooked because you don't get any notification You're not going to get an email. You're not going to get an error message saying you got any errors. You just have to go here to your connector and just take a look every so often to see if you got any sync errors. And there can be a lot of, I didn't see so many different sync errors, but most of the time you just got to Google it and it'll come up
Yeah.
and you'll understand. And usually it's kicked back from the Salesforce side. So maybe you have a
Yep.
validation rule set up, or you have something in place that, or flow, or some kind of triggers or something that is denying that prospect record to get synced up with Salesforce. So
Yep. The big thing I see is like with a drop down and there's a value that's being added from Pardot from a form, maybe product of
country,
interest or something like
country
that.
and state, or
Country is a big one. Yep. Yeah. Country and state,
state.
where the Pardot value is trying to update Salesforce with, WA, but in Salesforce it needs to be Washington. And so then that causes an error. Those are types of troubleshooting things that you'll want to be able to understand and navigate through on the
Yeah.
exam.
And that's why it's good to know Salesforce and understand what's happening on the Salesforce side, because that error is more than likely coming from Salesforce pushback. What are the engagement history dashboards and what needs to be provided for them to be visible? So we talked about that. So one, the permission set, the analytics view only user permission set, and then you need to add it to the page layout. And it provides some valuable information. So you're going to be able to see if someone was sent the email, if they will open the email, if they clicked on the link in the email, it's going to tell you which email it was. It's going to tell you how long ago they did that activity. It's also going to provide you a chart too, which is pretty nice. And you can see the most engaged assets that that person's been engaged with, or the campaigns that they've been engaged with. Gives you a lot of good information, that dashboard. Do you have that
Yep, and this is a
dashboard up,
good
Brandon?
example because we don't have it, but we can show you where you add it. So you go to the Lightning page here, and it's going to be a standard component,
And you'll also be able to see from this
engagement history
dashboard
dashboard.
what website someone was visiting, if they submitted a form, if they viewed your landing pages. So all that good stuff you're going to see in this engagement history dashboard. Oh,
So I'll
one other
probably
key here,
pop
very
this here.
important here. You do have to have the API access in order to
Hmm.
access this. So if you have professional edition in Salesforce and you don't have the API add-on, you will not be able to see this dashboard. So you need the API add-on if you have professional edition, or if you have enterprise, then you already have the API. So you should be good to go to add this engagement dashboard. But that's one key to remember. You do need the API access.
Let's see if
Is
that
there
worked.
permission
So
set that
yes,
users need to see that component? Yes, Benjamin, that permission set you need is analytics view only user. And you are limited to
this
how
one
many
right here.
permission sets you have depending on the edition of Pardot you have. So if you have growth edition, normally it only comes with 5 out of the box. And if you have plus edition, you get a little bit more. I think you get like 10. So you are limited on how many permission sets you can assign your users, but I believe you can purchase additional if you need without having to bump up to the next edition of Pardot or account engagement.
Yeah, and it does not add an additional storage cost, but there is a limit to how many users you have access to it, depending on your level of Pardot. But yeah, this is the dashboard down here. It's just pulling from your. I won't get too nerdy, but there's an engagement history data set that gets pulled from CRM Analytics or Einstein Analytics, and it gives you this nice view. So, and this works on the contact record, on an account record, and on the campaign record. It's a great little dashboard.
And opportunities and accounts. So
And
it's
opportunities and accounts. Thank you.
leads, contacts, accounts, opportunities, and campaigns.
Yep. Right. And then real quick, account engagement configuration. So some common questions. Jermaine, you want to take these?
Yep. Client looking to increase the quality of leads being passed from marketing to sales. What advice you would offer? Scoring and grading. That's
Yep.
probably the biggest thing that comes to mind right there. Setting up your scoring and grading. Have a threshold that says when you're going to push a prospect over to Salesforce. You want to push a good hot lead to your sales team. So you can definitely use scoring and grading for that.
Yep.
Marketing needs
And then
additional. Go ahead.
understanding that it's the assigning to a user that's going to send that over to the CRM is important. So you would set
Yes.
like in an exam, you might get something, you'll want to set an automation rule that says if a score is greater than 100 and a grade is better than a C plus, then then you assign to, sign to a user or sign via active assignment rule. So you want to understand that, I think, is what's important for that configuration question.
Yep. And also, and it depends on where that prospect is coming through. If they're coming through your website, you might have like a contact us form. So then I would direct the customer to use completion action. So on that form, I would use a completion action to assign to a user or notify a sales user. That way, as soon as that prospect submits that contact us form or requests the demo, someone gets notified, or it get pushed to Salesforce and it gets assigned to a lead, or you can have a queue, or you can assign it to a group and do a round robin assignment. But
Yep.
that's what advice I would offer. All right. Marketing needs additional CRM data available for segmentation. How would this be accomplished? Marketing needs additional CRM.
Add a custom field.
field.
Yep. Simple.
Yep.
We'll go quick. Add a custom field. So when you go to that setup setting, you have the field and an object configuration. You can add custom fields to your accounts. You can account records. You can add custom fields to your prospect records, and you can add your custom fields to your opportunity records as well. What are the 3 Pardot webinar connectors? This is important to know. Those connectors are, what is it? Go-to meeting. It's been a long time for me. Go-to meeting, go-to
WebEx. But I think they're
WebEx.
retiring 1 or 2. So I would
Yeah, so
definitely.
that might be an old question that you don't have to
Yeah.
worry about as much anymore.
Hey
But
guys, you can
yeah,
go over if you need to.
okay.
Obviously, I mean, if those who are attending can't stay for the whole thing, it's recorded. This is a huge part of the exam. So if you guys are able to continue on at like a regular pace, feel free to. If you have to drop, I get
Cool.
that too.
I
It's
will have to
totally fine.
drop here soon. But I think we've gotten through a good chunk of what we want to cover and what you'll want to know in preparation for the exam. So let's just click on to the next thing, user configuration. We've talked about this a bit as well. Thanks for those who have to drop off. Jermaine, a little bit about user configuration, some kind of questions that they could expect to see.
Yep. Best practices for user sync. So just making sure that you have the right role assigned to the user. That's the biggest thing. Understanding what you need them to do in the platform.
Mhm.
And that's going to determine which role they get. So that's kind of the biggest thing, because setting
And
it
I think
up
that
is
just
all done in.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing is just understanding what those 4 default roles are, right? You might have a question. A sales user needs to be able to see X. What role do you need to give them access to? So
Exactly.
understanding sales can only see the prospects that are assigned to them. Sales manager can see all prospects, but won't be able to send any marketing. If I remember way back, there's a question about, hey, you're working with a design firm that's building out your landing pages for you or something like that. They would need to be a marketing user. You wouldn't want to make them an admin user, but you want to make them a marketing user. So you want to know stuff about that. You want to know that you do have custom roles. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of questions about setting up custom roles, but you want to know the difference between, what the default roles are. 2 ways to define a user's custom roles, and then user role security limits. And a good place to review that stuff would be going back into your account engagement settings here. Spending a little bit of time down here in the user management and just getting familiar with particularly the roles tab down here. Like Jermaine was saying, you might not have this custom roles up above, but like if we take a look at marketing, you could go here and you can see what abilities do they have, what marketing abilities do they have, what abilities do they have on the prospect records. So this would be a good place just to go and get familiar with what those custom roles are, or what
Yep.
those default roles are in the
Yep.
security limits.
So if you get like a question that says a user needs to be able to import prospects, well, you're going to need an admin role to do that. So
Mhm.
just, yeah, definitely take a look at that and know which role can do what.
And then finally, tips for a successful exam day. Jermaine, things that you've done, Mr. One month in and got certified. What are some tips that you would recommend?
Do not take it at home. No,
Yeah.
I'm just joking. It's up to you, really. I would recommend going to the testing center, just because I've taken it at home and I've taken certs in the testing center, and I just feel more comfortable. Less distractions. Anything goes wrong, it's not on you. It's on the testing center. But when you're at home, I had issues with my internet. Then I had issues kind of with the exam, so I had to get support involved. So an exam that should have took me about, hour and a half, end up taking 3-4 hours, and that's not fun. And so I definitely, so my probably biggest tip, especially if you have a lot of distractions at home, because I know a lot of people are working remote these days. You got kids, you got Amazon coming, knocking on the door, delivering packages, ringing the doorbell, dogs and stuff. So if you don't have a quiet place at home to take the exam, I would definitely recommend going to the testing center and take your exam there. So that's probably my biggest tip. Another tip that I would recommend is also when you're going through the questions, I just usually skim through the questions initially, and I go straight to the answers, because normally it's going to be one or two that probably cannot be. It's far left field. So you could already do process of elimination, and then you go back to the question and read thorough. And I look for those keywords. Usually that is a keyword in there that's going to determine, especially when you get a question where it says, what's the best answer? So now you got to put on your Salesforce hat or your account engagement hat and think like they think, right? What they looking for. So that's what I normally do. I look for those keywords in the question, and then I can go back and usually it's a 50-50 toss up between one or two answers. But those are my biggest tips for the exam.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of taking it at the centers as well. As you go there, it's all set up for you. You don't have to worry about setting up extra cameras and clearing everything in the background or distraction. So I'm big on that. The other thing that I would say is give yourself the whole day. When I took my first Pardot exam, it was at a Dreamforce, right? And I was trying to do a zillion different things at once. I'm like, oh well, I'm here. I'm gonna just hop in and take this exam. But I was in such a rush that I didn't really have the day to sit down and think about what I was doing. So give yourself the time, use the time. I'm also a big believer of the feature. I like to go through and answer the questions that I'm super confident on first, and just skip the ones that I'm unsure about, and mark to review those as later. So I'll go through, answer the easy ones first because it is a timed exam, and then that gives me some more time on the ones that I'm struggling with to really look at closely if I need to. Um, uh, think about longer. Sometimes you might even have you answered one question and you're confident on that one, and that helps you answer another one down the road too. So
Yeah.
I recommend answering the ones that you're confident on first, and then go back in and just do the best you can on the ones that you're not so sure of. Further reading, we'll go ahead and Jermaine, you want to share these with them? So there's some great resources out there that are available. The one that I really liked was the automation champion one when we were reviewing this content. But yeah, Jermaine, thank you for that. These are great places to go and just again, just prepare, prepare, prepare. Some folks are, like a trailblazer like Jermaine, you're just going to go in there and take the exam. Other folks want to really, really be extra prepared. And in fact, if you're on a call like this today, you're probably one of those folks. So these are some additional resources that can be helpful for you in preparation.
And also
And that's it.
Udemy.
Oh,
Udemy,
Udemy.
Salesforce,
That's great.
and Salesforce certification days. Um, Definitely looking at those. Those are free, and you get a voucher too. You get a discount on the exam, and your dev org. I can't express that enough. Your dev org is gonna be your friend. If you get access to one, definitely utilize it, because that's where your
Yeah.
real world experience is gonna come into play if you don't
Yeah,
really have
or if
any.
you're working for a place, if you're working for a place that gives you access to a Pardot account, again, don't go clicking around through everything, but just spend some time going through the setup and the settings and configuration, just so you're familiar with what's inside of there.
And Rita, we got a question. Oh, thank you, Ben.
Oh, Ben's on it.
Yeah,
Welcome back, Ben.
I just posted a link to get a dev org. I don't remember, because I remember that initially they weren't like fully configured. Like it was an org that had Pardot that you had to then implement.
Yes,
I don't remember if it.
you got to implement it.
So Rita and
Great
others,
practice.
if that's still the case, then yes, you are going to have to implement it. It's not just locked and loaded ready. It's there.
Yeah.
It's like any managed package. It's there, but you're not necessarily going to be able to do anything with it until you actually assign yourself the permission sets and make
In
things
great
visible and
preparation
so
for
on.
the exam,
And
right?
that's the
So
beauty
yeah, I
of
mean
it.
that's
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the
So
beauty.
you go through that, and then it should be fresh on your mind. All right.
Yep.
That being said, I know I do have to hop, but thank you everyone for attending. Hopefully this added value. Good luck on your exam. We're rooting for you, Jermaine. Anything else to add?
Good luck. That's all I can say. And reach out to me on LinkedIn if y'all have any questions or need any issues. I'm here to help. So, yeah, go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. And good luck, everyone. And thank you for joining.
Yep. Thank
All
you,
right.
guys. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Jermaine. This has been super helpful. I will post the recording on the Pardot Geeks blog and on the event, and I will send an email out to everybody as well. So thank you guys
Awesome.
again, and have a good rest of your day. Good morning, good evening, good night, good afternoon, depending on where you are.
All right.
Alrighty. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Take care.
Bye-bye.